If you pour yourself a glass of wine tonight, your brain registers it as a luxury, a way to relax, or a social ritual. But deep within your biology, your body is reading that drink through a completely different lens. To your cells, the chemical signature of alcohol does not mean relaxation, it means survival. For millions of years, the pungent scent of fermenting sugars drifting through the air did not signify a vice, it signified the difference between life and starvation. We think of alcohol as a human invention, a byproduct of civilization we stumbled upon once we learned how to farm. But the truth is far older and deeply hardwired into our DNA. Long before the first city was built, and even before our ancestors walked upright, we were already adapted to drink. Our relationship with alcohol is not a story of human ingenuity, but of a freak genetic mutation that saved us from extinction. To understand how deep this connection goes, we have to travel back roughly 10 million years. The Earth was undergoing a massive climate shift. The lush tropical forests of Africa were beginning to dry out and recede, giving way to open savannas. For the primates living in the trees, this was an existential crisis. The competition for fresh fruit in the canopy became brutal. Dominant species controlled the high branches where the ripe fruit grew. Our direct ancestors, smaller and less dominant, were forced down to forage on the dangerous forest floor. But the food available on the ground was vastly different. Up in the canopy, fruit was picked fresh. On the ground, it was overripe, bruised, and heavily populated by wild yeasts. These yeasts were converting the natural sugars inside the fruit into ethanol. The forest floor was quite literally bubbling with alcohol. For almost every animal, eating fermented fruit is a terrible survival strategy. Ethanol is a potent toxin that leaves an animal disoriented and sluggish, making it an easy meal for a predator. Furthermore, the standard mammalian liver cannot process ethanol quickly enough to prevent severe poisoning. For millions of years, this created a biological barrier. The bounty of fallen fruit on the forest floor was locked away, a toxic hazard most species had to avoid even while starving. But as the forests shrank, the pressure on our ancestors reached a breaking point. Around 10 million years ago, a miracle arrived in the form of a single accidental typo in our genetic code. A profound mutation occurred in the ADH4 gene, which produces the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol. The mutation altered a single amino acid, allowing our ancestors to break down ethanol 40 times faster than any other primate. This genetic shift redrew the map of survival. While other primates fought for the limited fruit in the trees, our ancestors could step down onto the forest floor and consume a massive, untouched food source. Because their bodies processed ethanol almost instantly, they didn't get dangerously drunk. They extracted calories, neutralized the toxin, and survived. Anthropologist Robert Dudley formalized this as the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. He argued that our attraction to the smell of alcohol is an evolutionary homing beacon. In a dense forest, that scent was an arrow pointing toward a high-calorie gold mine. Ethanol contains nearly twice the caloric density of ordinary carbohydrates. In a world of scarcity, a primate that could track it down and digest it had an unimaginable advantage. We didn't learn to love alcohol because it felt good. We loved it because it kept us alive. If our biological relationship with alcohol began millions of years ago, a second transformation occurred at the dawn of human civilization. For decades, the standard narrative taught that early humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers who settled down to grow wheat and bake bread. This food supply supposedly allowed them to build permanent villages and invent writing, law, and government. Agriculture, in this view, was driven by the practical need for bread. But archaeologists eventually noticed a glaring flaw in this theory. The wild grains that early humans first chose to domesticate were incredibly difficult to harvest. They produced tiny yields, required immense labor, and didn't make very good bread. Why would nomadic hunter-gatherers give up their freedom and spend months performing back-breaking labor just to get a handful of crude flour? The answer, it turns out, wasn't bread at all. It was beer. Biomolecular archaeology has completely revolutionized our understanding of this transition. Scientists can now analyze microscopic chemical residues trapped inside the porous clay of ancient pottery and prehistoric tools.
What they are finding is rewriting history. In Rockafet Cave in modern-day Israel, researchers discovered stone mortars used by the Natufian culture over 13,000 years ago. When they analyzed the residues embedded in the stone, they didn't find traces of dough or baking. They found evidence of extensive plant processing, malting, and fermentation. The Natufians were brewing a primitive, thick barley beer thousands of years before anyone was baking loaves of bread. Similar discoveries have emerged all over the globe, showing that the intentional drive to ferment grains and fruits was one of the earliest universal human behaviors. The most stunning evidence comes from Göbekli Tepe, a prehistoric site in Turkey dating back over 11,000 years. Long before the pyramids, humans carved massive stone pillars arranged in giant circles. It was built by hunter-gatherers who did not live in permanent villages. Thousands of people had to gather from miles away to transport these colossal stones. How did leaders convince scattered, independent tribes to cooperate? The answer lay in the site's deep architectural layers. Archaeologists uncovered massive stone troughs, large enough to hold up to 40 gallons of liquid. When tested, they contained calcium oxalate, a chemical byproduct known as beer stone. Göbekli Tepe was a place of feasting. The construction of the world's first great architectural wonder was fueled, quite literally, by mass-produced alcohol. This reveals a profound truth about human nature. Humans are naturally tribal primates. For millennia, our social groups were small, rarely exceeding 100 individuals. Encountering a stranger usually meant violence. But to build a civilization, humans had to live alongside thousands of total strangers without conflict. This is where alcohol served its ultimate evolutionary function as a social lubricant. Alcohol downregulates the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for anxiety and social vigilance. It floods the system with endorphins, triggering the exact neurological pathways used in primate social bonding. Around ancient feasting fires, alcohol lowered the natural defenses of rival tribes, allowing strangers to share stories and form alliances. Alcohol did not just appear after civilization was born, it was the catalyst that made it possible. We are left with a strange and beautiful paradox.
The very substance that modern society often views as a threat to order is the exact substance that allowed us to create order to begin with. We engineered the agricultural world not because we were hungry for food, but because we were thirsty for connection. But this ancient alliance carries a heavy cost. Our brains are still operating on the programming of that primate foraging on the forest floor 10 million years ago. To that primate, alcohol was a rare, valuable source of life-saving calories. Our biology was wired to consume as much of it as possible because it might be months before we found it again. Today, we live in an artificial landscape where alcohol is mass-produced and universally available. The evolutionary mechanism that once saved our ancestors from starvation has become a trap. Our bodies are still chasing the scarce energy of the ancient forest floor. So when did ancient humans first drink alcohol? The truest answer is that we didn't discover it. It discovered us. It shaped our genes long before we had language. It drew us down from the trees, gave us the stamina to explore the ground, and eventually forced us to stop wandering, settle down, and till the earth. The next time you hold a glass of wine or beer up to the light, look closely at the bubbles rising to the surface. You are not just looking at a beverage, you are looking at the chemical engine of human history. You are looking at the ancient scent that guided your ancestors through the dark, shrinking forests of Africa, the liquid fuel that raised the first stone temples from the dirt, and the strange volatile molecule that convinced a lonely, suspicious species of primate to finally sit down together, put down their weapons, and build the modern world.